We're back here on Cashing Out on VSIN, the Sports Betting Network. Greg Oops Pearson holding it down for Joe tonight as enjoying a nice vacation, and it's nice to be joined by this man every week right here on this fine program because he does a tremendous job taking a look at fantasy football and so much more. Joining me on the Progressive Guest Line, we've got Tony Cutillo. He does a tremendous job over at SiriusXM and so many other platforms. And Tony, great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me, Greg. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Tony. And first things first, before we dive in on any of these specific players, just through 3 weeks, have you seen any sort of carnage quite like this? Because I just take a look at all these fantasy football leagues, I take a look at all these survivor leagues, like you're able to take a look at anything NFL related. And it just feels like everything that we thought we knew 3 weeks ago, we no longer know, other than the Chiefs will pull out one possession games.
Yeah, man, 100%. Look, throw everything out the window. Throw stats, throw analytics, throw it all out. I mean, there's no more of what they did last week against this team as far as what they did. Look at the Saints with Philadelphia. I mean, who thought that Philadelphia was going to shut the Saints down? Who thought Denver was going to blanket Tampa Bay? I mean, you just can't predict these things. And the injuries, like you said, have been absolutely monotonous. I mean, you talk about I've never seen so many star injuries going down after the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, it is absolutely wild. And how much do you think that this benefits those that they look a little bit more on the waiver wire in terms of fantasy, and they've went, for lack of a better term, a little bit more dumpster diving, or saving their money more in terms of those that have a little bit of a budget in terms of the waiver wire as well? Because I think that this is the sort of year where those sorts of players, they really feast.
Oh, they really do. And I'll tell you what, it just separates the real players from the frauds now, because if you're not paying attention, and you're really not looking into that waiver wire, you're going to lose. I mean, it's simple as that. You're going to get passed by. A lot of people pass by a lot of good players already. So you really have to be dialed in. I mean, look, East Coast, they open up at about 2 a.m. they close. So, I mean, I'm going to get off, and I'm still going to dissect it until 2 a.m. to make sure I got the right players.
Absolutely. I can tell you right now, I'm in a fantasy league myself where it's 2 quarterbacks, so that makes it very difficult to say the least. I had Bryce Young at one of them, had to pick up Malik Willis this week. That paid off quite well, so I always think that there's a lot of value there, and there are some people right now that they are looking for a quarterback because we have seen a lot of key injuries. Who are you looking at right now that might be available in a lot of leagues / might be worth a look in terms of daily fantasy?
Now, I said this before, and I'll say it again. You know, when you look at the waiver wire, anybody can sit here and tell you what guys you could pluck off, right? But if you're looking at the deeper, the end game, I really like Bo Nix. And I know a lot of people are going to say, he hasn't even thrown a touchdown yet. Doesn't matter. You mentioned it off air, Greg. Mobile quarterback. Not to mention Hall of Fame head coach who's finally getting his system. Nobody thought he'd go into Tampa and do what he did. And he did. He did it, man. That's what Bo Nix did. And the thing about him is he's getting more comfortable. He went from 57 to 69% completion percentage upgrade in the last 2 weeks. That's showing more comfort in a Sean Payton-based offense. And he's 6 for 35 all last week on the ground, and he already has 2 rushing touchdowns. So I look at Bo Nix. I mean, I hate to say this name. You know what? I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. But there's a guy we could compare him from back in the day who went to the University of Florida. I'll just give you a hint that this could be the second coming of in Denver.
I absolutely love it. We will save that name right there, but we do want to mention this one as well because there's a guy on the New England Patriots that I know that you're pretty high on, and Antonio Gibson. Talk to me about him because I think that he could be able to provide some value, whether you're looking at the fantasy football side of things or for those of you that are looking at player props for this week. Does feel like Gibson is in for a pretty big workload both this week and moving forward.
Yeah, well, you know, you have a little bit of an injury with Ramondre Stevenson, but that's just not even why I like Antonio Gibson. It's exactly what you said. It's workload. And if you've been watching football, and I wasn't big on Antonio Gibson in the beginning of the year because Ramondre gets 21 to 25 attempts every single game. But what he's done is 125 yards rushing in the last 2 games. He's getting more comfortable. And Greg, what happens is with a guy like Gerard Mayo, he wants to mix up the offense a little bit because it's very stagnant. And what's going to happen is there's going to be more throws to the running back. And Antonio Gibson is really, really good out in the flat. So they're going to dial his name a lot going forward. He's a guy that you want to keep an eye on and get on your roster.
No doubt about it, as we've got Tony Cutillo. He does great work with the fantasy side of things over on SiriusXM, joining me right here on Cashing Out on VSIN, the Sports Betting Network. And I think that it's going to be really interesting to see this player and his stock moving forward as well, because I know that you do a great job on the DFS side of things. And when I was watching those two games on Monday, the guy that really stood out to me, what we were able to get out of Terry McLaurin, because they were just listing off all the different quarterbacks that he has caught passes from. Like, he has survived the Dan Snyder era. Like, this guy has been a stalwart out there in Washington. And I know that you're quite high on him, whether it's taking a look at him perhaps in trade in terms of fantasy or looking at him more in terms of the DFS side of things as well.
100%. Listen, one thing you could do with the trade market is you look at guys that are giving up on certain guys. And Scary Terry was really bad the first couple weeks of the season, right? But this is a young quarterback. This is a new offense that they're employing out there. And listen, Cliff Kingsbury, you can say what you want. He does know how to dial in an offense. And Scary Terry last week, get a 55-yard catch. Shows he still has the legs. And this week, he's under 6,000 in the DFS market as a top wide receiver. Oh, and by the way, last week, Amon-Ra picked apart the middle of that Arizona defense. And that's what Terry's going to do again this week.
And then I love that you've got this guy a little bit highlighted as well. It's Zach Moss, who I've liked ever since he was over at Utah. I felt like he was a really good player in college that never really got his fair shot in the NFL ranks. Now we've been seeing a few injuries with regards to that Bengals backfield as well. Talk to me about Zach Moss and what you're liking about him.
But the funny thing is, coming in this year, I thought, a lot of people thought as well, Chase Brown was going to be the guy. He's the more explosive running back. He's younger. He's utilized more in the passing game. But this Cincinnati offense has just been all over and sporadic. So the one thing I like about it, 48 yards on the ground last week. He has identical carries the last 2 weeks, which is 12. But here's the thing. He gets the opportunities in the red zone. He's going to get you those easy garbage touchdowns. And especially this week against Carolina, last week he almost had 5 yards per carry. I'm telling you, against Carolina, he's going to have multiple scoring opportunities. So he could put a line up, Greg, like, let's say 15 carries for 60 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he could actually win your DFS matchup.
And you mentioned that Carolina Panthers game where they looked absolutely sorry in those first 2 weeks. They benched Bryce Young and Andy Dalton. It looked like the Andy Dalton of old. Now he gets a revenge matchup against his old Cincinnati Bengals team. How do you take a look at that matchup really on both sides? Because if you look at the offense of the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday Night Football, more than presentable. Anyone putting that loss on Joe Burrow, I don't know what the heck you are looking at and what you're doing, because he was great. And for the Carolina Panthers, they showed more than a heartbeat on Sunday. They looked really good on offense.
They looked really good. And, this happens a lot, right? You take a young quarterback who's overwhelmed in a system, and you put a veteran guy in there who understands the logic, he understands the methodology, and he goes out and he just produces. He made Deontay Johnson look like a wide receiver 1 again, which we all knew that he was. He opened up games for Chuba Hubbard. And we're talking about Andy Dalton. Again, for the life of me, he just keeps reviving teams, man. He's reviving teams. So I like him this week a lot. He was 319 for 3 touchdowns last week. I mean, but here's the thing. Jaden Daniels against Cincinnati, 91% completion percentage last week. That's unheard of. Best game as a rookie. So this defense, in my opinion, in Cincinnati is washed. So I'm all in on Andy Dalton at $5,200.
Yep, I absolutely love that. The Cincinnati Bengals team is probably one that you want as many players as humanly possible to go against. If you're looking at player props for the upcoming week, there might be some good bets out there as well. And this is a little bit of an all-encompassing question. I feel like this is the case for fantasy. This is the case for betting. Heck, for just general fandom in general. How much do you take out of the first 3 weeks, and how much do you want to cling on to some of your priors coming into the season, some of the 2023 stats, or do you want to just be taking a look at this 3-game sample size and pretty much be basing everything that we've been seeing around those 3 games that we've gotten thus far?
Well, I never look at the previous year. I honestly don't. And that's just my own theory, because things change so much, whether it be offensive methodology, whether it be the offensive line movement, the scheme, the players. So I'm looking at these 3 games, but I'm always a week-to-week guy, especially this year. So I'm looking at what happened last week, and I'm not looking at what they did it against. I'm looking at what they did specifically, what their target share was, what their route running capabilities were. So that's where I'm at right there. I don't look at that anymore. Just going forward, I'm a week-to-week product. And I think that's, especially this year, is how you have to look at fantasy.
I think what you just said there at the end was big. This year is one where you certainly do as well, because it has been a mash unit for so many of these teams and have about 45 seconds left. How do you take a look at the receiver share with the Houston Texans? Because as we know, lots of star power for Deshaun, or for everyone to utilize.
Yeah, I mean, listen, CJ Stroud's got his number of targets out there, as Stephon Diggs really proven to be the worthy number one wide receiver over Nico Collins the last couple of weeks. But I will say this, Tank Dell, just keep an eye on him. He was 6 for 62 last week. A Jacksonville defense got torched by Khalil Shakir of Buffalo. Just keep an eye on those ribs. Watch the ribs from Tank Dell. But that could be a really good $5,400 value in DFS.
Absolutely. Mr. Stroud has had himself a nice first year plus in the NFL, and now he's got a lot of toys to play with, and we've got ourselves a lot to take a look at in terms of week 4 of the NFL. Tony Cutillo does great work over at SiriusXM Fantasy, and we're going to be taking a look at a few player prop bets that he's got for this week on the flip side right here on Cashing Out on VSIN, the Sports Betting Network.